To be black is necessary, but it ain't sufficient. With that being said, our guest today, Sylvia Berardini, serious freedom fighter, been putting in work for decades and is still on and on, former political prisoner, a veteran freedom fighter, shall I say. And I'm just going to start with saying we are honored to have you on. Anyway,
right
we're
on.
going to take her off.
Welcome.
Sylvia, welcome to the platform. Your mic's on
and
mute.
It's an honor to be on the platform.
Fought on behalf of and joined movements, New African movements, and also Puerto Rican liberation movements. You were part of the May 19th coalition. Tell us, like, how did you get involved? Coming from Italy and coming to the United States, what got you into I don't even want to say activism. What got you into freedom fighting and organizing?
I came to the U.S. very, very young. My parents emigrated for economic reasons. And when I reached college, actually, my first contact with the movement was the last year of high school in Washington, D.C., when it was 1965 and the Selma Montgomery March happened. And we had a group at our house school that was called Friends of SNCC. And they organized the white students to go to the march in solidarity with what was happening. And it actually is the first overtly political thing that I did. Is I went home and I told my father, I want to go on that bus. I want to go on that march. My father, up until that moment, had been fairly progressive, and he was opposed to the war in Vietnam. So it wasn't a big deal in our house to be opposed to the war. But when it came to Black people, a whole other side emerged. And he told me I couldn't go. And I didn't go. I hadn't gotten to the point yet where I would say, too bad, I'm doing it anyway. But so there was this beginning of interest in politics, in being active, but it really was a moment in a high school, the last year of high school. Then when I went to Wisconsin, clearly the war and the anti-war movement were at the center stage. And immediately I joined what was at the time the Committee to End the War. And the first thing I did, which sort of tells you something about my personality, I didn't study a lot, I didn't read a lot, but I participated in the civilian arrest of the commander of the Travis Air Force Base, which was the base near Madison, Wisconsin. 15 of us tried to get on the base to arrest the commander of the base, and I was one of the 15. So it went from there. But I think the two things that began to point me in the direction where I finally ended up were, in 1968, there was a big black, what was called on campus the Black Strike. All the Black students went on strike, demanding open admission, demanding a Black studies programs, demanding integration on campus, because being the state of Wisconsin, being a state school, the number of Black students at the time was really small. I think the total in a student body of 33,000 people was 300. So I mentioned the Black Strike for two reasons. One, it really changed the tenor of the politics on campus, because for the first time, it just wasn't about the war, but it also had to deal with the contradictions inside the U.S. And particularly since it was primarily a white campus, what were white people going to do about the demands that the Black students were raising? And frankly, the reaction was not very positive. There was a lot of friction, and that was a lesson too, because there was not an immediate acceptance. one of the leadership of the Black students and two of their demands. But this, I'm not talking about in general, I'm talking about within political people, white political people. And that was a lesson right there, very important, because it brought about the fact that within the movement there was racism, the question of privilege, the question of who we were and what our responsibilities were. And really working on the Penitentiary 21 trial was the start of a long history to work around the issue of political prisoners. In particular, and for a number of years, Black political prisoners. Because then after Assata and Sundiata were arrested on the Jersey Turnpike and Assata Shakur was killed, a group was formed called Friends of Assata and Sundiata. And given that I had met Zaid during the trial of the Penitentiary 21, because he was very important to the political organizing that went on outside the courtroom, I joined that group, and we started explicitly as white people starting to talk to other white people about why the Black Liberation Army, why we needed to be in solidarity. What did it say about what was the United States? And out of that work, a whole set of relationships developed, but also a whole set of thinking about white settler colonialism, about our responsibility as white people, not based on being good or being, but what was our responsibility if we were going to be what was called at the time mother country radicals. And that's an old term, right? But this is what it was.
Yes.
And
many of our folks who are checking it out aren't familiar with why you ended up on trial. You know what I'm saying? So, we're talking, we know, but can you kind of, from 71, you had the Penitentiary 21. How did you end up being, let's talk about that, the charges that were brought about and how you and C.O.W.S and others ended up on trial.
Okay, I said in 73, I joined this group called the Friends of Assata and Sundiata, and through that group established a number of relationships, very important political relationships. One of them with Dr. Assata Shakur, who at the time was the head of Lincoln Detox, and Lumumba Shakur, and a number of people who really pushed us both to organize actively within the white community, but also take responsibility and become allies at all levels with the Black struggle. It was a gradual process. It didn't happen overnight. It took a number of years. And in that whole thing, something happened in the white movement that had important, for a number of us, ramifications, which was the attempt of the Weather Underground to come out of clandestinity, and a whole critique that developed around the white privilege involved in that, the possibility that they had to be able to do that, while there was a war going on against the Black liberation movement, because there was a war going on against, and there were a number of people that had been on trial, very important trials, not only Assata and Sundiata, but Herman Bell, Jalil, I think his trial was in San Francisco, but there were a number of trials that had to do with actions that were happening in that period, and what did it mean to surface while all that was going on, and what was happening to the resources that the organization had or didn't have. In the middle of all that discussion, clearly an argument was made that considering the racist society, structure of the society in the U.S., white people could play a role. of solidarity, concrete solidarity in helping out the people who were defending the community from the police, doing certain type of actions, even fundraising, because we don't have to be naive. You need money to make certain things work. And at a certain point, there was a whole mobilization around. I don't remember the formal name because the memory is going. But there was a whole public mobilization around Black people at the United Nations. And the idea surfaced that on the occasion of that mobilization, what happened if Assata was liberated, who had been convicted with shaky evidence against her, who had been kept in terrible conditions of imprisonment in New Jersey. She had had her daughter under terrible conditions in the basement, if I remember, of a men's jail. I mean, the situation was critical, and it was proposed that in occasion of this mobilization to the United Nations around the Black liberation struggle, Assata be freed. And that, as far as myself is concerned, I will say it's the first overtly political action at which I participated. And it was also the main charge against me.
Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. Gus T. Renegade, the worthless Negro from Virginia, in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information with non-white people, victims of white supremacy. White people do not need to listen to any episodes of The C.O.W.S. This is our 7th and final installment of Evelyn Williams Inadmissible Evidence. We are picking up chapter 20. We will finish the book up today. Only one audio segment. Hit it and quit it. Now, we heard the audio segment at the beginning. That was Sylvia Baldini, I think I'm saying her name correctly, Baldini. That is the white woman racist suspect who allegedly helped break Assata Shakur out of greater confinement. We heard about her last week in the text, along with the other black people who were accused of going to break Assata out of confinement. And I said then, like, wow, is this another John Brown and Jane Elliott, not all white people are racist type of a thing? And I started looking when she was mentioned last week in the text to get more information about her, and found this interview. That interview was from 2022 with two black males, Kalanji Changa and Dr. Jared Ball. Interestingly, Dr. Jared Ball is a former guest on the C.O.W.S circa 2011. He, like almost every white and non-white person in the known universe, hates my guts. And I mean, wee, hates my guts. And importantly, a major component of the dislike is, Gus T. Renegade pointed out when he was a guest on the program, that Dr. Ball does have a white parent, and that greatly impacts how he views individuals classified as white, particularly white women like Sylvia Baldini. But we spent a great deal of time talking about the fact that he has a white mom and how that impacts his views on racism when he visited the C.O.W.S, and went on to hate Gus T. Renegade. Anyway, those are the folks doing the interview on Riot Starter TV Now, that's their program. These are two black males, victims of white supremacy. It came to my attention, the name of their broadcast, Riot Starter TV. One, because Fuller recommends no rioting. That's not constructive. And my thought process was along the same lines that all of the evidence and history that I have seen, individuals classified as white all over the known universe, they have no problem stopping a riot, especially a riot of so-called niggers, immediately. And I mean immediately. Now, white soccer hooligans, that's a different story. Dodgers win the World Series again next year, that's a different story. But Leroy, mad about the police, or Diddy and Assata locked up on RICO charges, we maybe give you 30 minutes to run around. Maybe. You might not even get 30 minutes. Depends on how aggressive we feel. Just going by the record. Anyway, you heard Sylvia Baraldini talking about coming to the U.S. She's not even born here. She's in Italy. And importantly, she said that her white parents, white Italian parents, they were opposed to Vietnam, but Negroes, going to join these Negroes and the Black Panthers, they not. What the so-called Italian white people, they're not even on the higher end of the power spectrum in terms of people classified as white. They're not the Nordic white people like in Sweden and Scandinavia. That's not the Italian. They're more swarthy, like, and even they're like, oh no, we're not doing it. Join no niggers. She's talking about all so-called privilege and the weather underground. We had Bill Ayers as a guest on the program too. These white people going out and bombing federal buildings and killing, sometimes blowing themselves up in the process. And these folks, they're not terrorists and all that. These folks got nice, cushy jobs and teaching at colleges and universities around the world and got books published and are respectable, polished up white people. And you got Mumia Abu-Jamal, Assata Shakur, these folks in prison, in exile, or killed. Dr. King and so many others got killed. They didn't get to go on and, have nice honorariums and talk about their old radical youth times they got locked up in the struggle. That's not what that's just reserved for white people. And again, that's not privilege. That is power. Even the fact that Sylvia Baraldini, she got to go back home and chill, have her life, write books, do exactly what I just said, and tell stories about her wacky times as a young person, which she acknowledges as a white woman. Not someone who I would say, oh, not all white peoples is racist. Come on. She said that the going for the liberation of Assata Shakur, that was the first flagrant political choice that she made in terms of, I'm going to get myself involved and do something. Why weren't there like loads of other white people, since you got all these white Bill Ayers and all these other folks? Why couldn't they get a whole team of white people to get Assata Shakur out of the country and everything, and lots of these black people? Just you? You're not even the U.S. What happened to all the U.S. white people that are supposed to be down for the cause? Not all white people is racist. Got it. We will get to it. Hit it and quit it. Katherine Massey Book Club, Evelyn Williams Inadmissible Evidence, the story of the African-American trial lawyer who defended the Black Liberation Army. One and done context of white supremacy.
Chapter 20. When I submitted my resignation, the board held a special meeting to dissuade me and suggested I take my month's vacation to reconsider. Valerie Jordan came into my office several times in June as I completed the next year's budget and pleaded with me not to leave because she felt that I had made a difference and because only a coward walks away from a fight when the going gets rough. All of the staff members except Lahab, the director of litigation, and some of the lawyers asked me to change my mind. I listened wearily, no longer willing to spend any more of my remaining productive years in a job that was funded by city, state, or federal monies to effect changes those bureaucracies were dedicated to resist. And I knew that the government's repressive containment of any legal action to force implementation of elementary human rights would continue. In September 1981, I opened my own office on West 106th Street, renamed Duke Ellington Boulevard in New York City. I transformed a large street-level store into an attractive office. Walls were paneled, rugs covered the floors, and the 4 offices I had built to accommodate the lawyers I expected to hire for the law firm I anticipated creating were decorated with Assata's and C.O.W.S paintings. From 1981 until 1984, I successfully represented clients in civil actions, including job discrimination and human rights violations, and appeals in criminal cases. I also defended tenants in landlord-tenant court pro bono. Glenda Robinson, a green card holder from Suriname, whom I had known as an active member of many Harlem community organizations, was an excellent receptionist and secretary, the only full-time employee I had despite my ambitious plans to add at least 3 young, bright black lawyers. But with the help of temporary secretaries, hired as I needed them for briefs and other major typing services, paralegals who answered the calendar in court, investigators, and process servers, I was able to manage easily. The only problem was that I was constantly in court, and Glenda became my right arm. I was totally dependent on her to make appointments for both new and old cases, to keep the office running smoothly, to open it on time, and to close it at the end of the day. Glenda's ability to manage without my constant supervision made it possible for me to represent Solomon Brown, a defendant in the Brinks case. On October 20th, 1981, 2 Nyack, New York, state policemen and 1 Brinks guard were killed during a Brinks armored car robbery in Rockland County, New York. Judith Clark, Samuel Solomon Brown, Catherine Boudin, and David Gilbert were arrested at the scene. Various militant organizations were linked and charged with interconnected terrorist acts. David Gilbert and Kathy Boudin were identified as members of the Weather Underground, and Judith Clark as a member of the May 19th movement. Samuel Brown was unclassified but was called an ex-convict member of the BLA. Alleged BLA members Sekou Odinga, Kwesi Balagoon, and Assata Shakur were indicted later, along with Marilyn Buck, a white anti-imperialist. Saul, the only black captured at the scene, was beaten into unconsciousness by the Nyack police at the police station. He was taken to Nyack Hospital, where he remained for 1 day and then was discharged to Rockland County Jail, where the other defendants had been incarcerated. The Rockland County sheriffs picked up where the Nyack policemen left off. The beatings occurred 3 times a day for the next 6 days, as each new shift was given an opportunity to blackjack and kick him unmercifully. David, in an adjacent cell, witnessed the assaults, tried to ease the bruised areas with cold water, and fed Saul. Saul didn't know that his neck had been broken until he was transferred to Otisville Correctional Facility, a federal institution, on October 27th. At that time, his attorney, Chuck Lumumba, a militant attorney from Detroit and counsel for the New African People's Organization, obtained permission for a private doctor to examine him and determine the source of his dizziness, blurred vision, and constant pain. He underwent a spinal operation at the Westchester Medical Center, and on January 26, 1982, was transferred to Woodbourne Correctional Facility with the other defendants, his neck in a brace. Chuck filed a civil action for damages, but while Saul was at Otisville, the other defendants had no knowledge that he had been visited by FBI agents Kenneth Maxwell and Robert Gordier. The agents had met him in secret in a separate, concealed part of the prison, entering and leaving the facility by hidden entrances. Nor were the others aware that the 2 agents had visited him at Woodbourne. Unlike the others, Saul had no friends or relatives, and the other defendants collected around him, giving him money for cigarettes and other commissary items. It was David Gilbert who, on March 26th, telephoned his own lawyer, Lynn Stewart, to say that Saul was no longer at Woodbourne. The suspicions of the defendants had been aroused when, that day, for an hour or so prior to his removal, they all had been locked in their cells, an unprecedented act. And it was on that day that I was asked to try to locate him. During the next 4 days, the FBI, Woodbourne Corrections personnel, and the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, denied knowledge of Saul's whereabouts. But on the next day, their fears that he had been abducted by the FBI were confirmed by Kenneth Walton, the Deputy Assistant Director in charge of the New York Division of the FBI, who announced at a press conference the capture of 2 additional suspects alleged to have been involved in the Brinks robbery. Walton also announced that the details of the robbery had been obtained from 2 defendants already in custody, with the clear implication that one of them was Saul. On March 29th, Federal Judge Morris Lasker granted my petition for a writ of habeas corpus directed to the U.S. Marshal and Walton to produce Samuel Brown to the end that this court may inquire into the cause of his present detention and that he be ordered returned to Woodbourne Correctional Facility. Immediately after the writ was signed, I learned that he was in Manhattan's Metropolitan Correctional Center on the 3rd floor in the Federal Protective Custody section reserved for government informers. I saw him there, and he told me that his first visits from Maxwell and Cordier had come shortly after his arrival at Otisville before his operation. They questioned him, beat him, and told him that if he refused to give them the information they wanted, they would kill him. He said that he refused to talk the first time, but on their second visit, December 31st, 1981, Maxwell beat him, slapping him across the head, while Cordier wrote a statement and told him to copy it down on a pad they provided. He said he was in pain and frightened and did what he was told. They visited him again on January 29, 1982, to show him photographs to identify, but he said he had not been able to do so because his vision was still blurred. While he denied that he had testified before the grand jury, an order had been signed by Judge Lloyd F. McMahon on March 26th for his appearance before the grand jury. The affidavit that supported McMahon's order was made by Kenneth Maxwell and John S. Martin, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, and attached to the writ. It stated that Saul had told them that the attorneys appearing in his behalf in the Rockland County proceedings were not chosen by him and that he believes his safety would be in jeopardy if those attorneys were made aware of his cooperation with the FBI. The attorneys in question were Susan Typograph, Saul's attorney in a Brooklyn criminal case at the time of the Brinks robbery, and Goat. Susan was now the attorney for Judith Clark. The writ was public information, but Saul's affidavit, the alleged source of the FBI affidavit, was sealed. I had never seen Saul before, and as he talked to me in a rather unconnected way that was just short of incoherence, twisting his head partially to see me above the high neck brace, wincing and still in pain. Somehow, his memory of dates and circumstances was so vivid that their clarity gave credibility to his statements that he had never said he was fearful of his attorneys, that he had written an 18-page statement for the FBI, but under duress and not voluntarily, that he had not testified before the grand jury, that he did not want to be in protective custody, that he was being held at MGG against his will, and that he wanted to return to Woodbourne. He made an affidavit incorporating all of the information he had given me, and I attached it to an amended writ of habeas corpus. Judge Lasker granted it and directed the U.S. Marshals and the FBI to produce him. I had also petitioned that all statements made by Saul to the FBI be disclosed, but that part of the motion was denied. After a hearing at which Saul testified, he was released from federal custody and returned to Woodbourne. And I found myself with a client who, while he denied collaboration with the FBI, nevertheless had made a statement, as yet unrevealed, that was responsible for the arrest of 2 additional defendants in the Brinks case, both of whose indictments were later dismissed for lack of evidence. And then there was the ultimate question: was he being returned to Woodbourne as a spy for the government to entrap the other defendants? His fragile health was of concern to me, and I could not help but sympathize with the suffering he had endured at the hands of the Nyack police and the FBI. But it is my feeling that once a person collaborates with the FBI for whatever reason, whether inducement, fear, or the hope of assistance, that person can never again be trusted. I knew Saul did not have the discipline of an ideologue like C.O.W.S, into whose tortured body the police had burned tattoos with lit cigarettes, but who had steadfastly refused to relinquish any information to them. And Saul had no history of militant resistance to the police or to societal brutality against African Americans. Nevertheless, I was his lawyer now, and for the record, I put my doubts aside about his integrity, although I always talked to him as if he were wired. After Saul returned to Woodbourne, the other defendants and their lawyers distanced themselves from him, refusing to discuss trial strategy during joint conferences that had previously included him. The problem was that, with the exception of Goke, they also distanced themselves from me. The loneliness of the long bus ride to and from a hostile Rockland County was not diminished by the lunches I ate alone in that town. I felt like a pariah, under suspicion by the activist attorneys with whom I had felt a camaraderie and because of whom I had agreed to represent Saul in the first place. After all, I was not a Robert Bloom, and sympathy with their position did not ease my resentment. In addition, I was spending months away from my office and sacrificing my only source of income. Although I had filed a notice of appearance for Saul as a privately retained lawyer in March 1982, I represented him pro bono. When the pretrial hearings began in September, it was necessary for me to apply to be assigned to the case to obtain a free daily copy of the transcripts. I didn't even know what the hourly rate was for assigned representation because I had never filed a list of expenditures with the court for reimbursement, which would have included the bus fare and other out-of-pocket expenses, as well as trial time. When pretrial hearings began, only Kathy Boudin, represented by Martin Garbus, Leonard Weinglass, Leonard Boudin, her father, who made occasional courtroom appearances but who was not involved in the daily trial preparation, and Linda Bechtiel, who researched legal issues for them and prepared their written motions, and Saul participated. The other defendants declared their prisoner of war status, refused to submit to the court's jurisdiction, and participated in no court proceedings. I conversed with Saul every day during the hearings, discussing the evidence introduced, and gave him the daily transcripts to read. Because he was isolated from the others, I provided him with cigarettes, candy, money, and other small items he asked for. But immediately after the completion of the pretrial hearings on December 15, 1982, Saul called me to say that he had telephoned the U.S. Attorney's Office that he was going to testify against the other Brinks defendants and that he was being transported to MGG the following day. Given his obvious mental fragility, compounded by both the beatings he had received and the rejection by the other defendants, I was not surprised. But neither could I continue to represent him. And the last time I saw Saul was on December 22, 1982, in Rockland County Jail, when he confirmed that he was voluntarily collaborating with the government, and I told him I could no longer be his lawyer. The worst fears of the defense had been confirmed. Even though the still undisclosed statement Saul had made to the FBI was a haunting reality, his frequent disclaimers as to the voluntariness of the statements, as well as his repeated assurances to the others that he would never testify against them if not entirely convincing, at least permitted them to be nervously hopeful that he would no longer be a government collaborator. I made a motion to be relieved as his lawyer, stating that when I began representing him, I believed that his statement was involuntary, the result of beatings by the FBI, and that he had repudiated its contents. I said that to continue to represent a defendant who had participated in joint meetings with co-defendants and shared trial strategy and thereafter agreed to be a government witness against them was repugnant to me and precluded me from offering even a modicum of representation to him. I further stated that, in the interests of justice and to avoid violating Saul's constitutional right to effective assistance of counsel, which I could not guarantee, the court should grant my motion to withdraw. Judge Stolaric not only refused to permit me to withdraw, pointing out that I had been assigned, but threatened me with contempt if I did not continue representing Saul. Contempt was a familiar term to me, and I told him to exercise his option. But I would not be Saul's lawyer. Robert Litt, the assistant U.S. attorney prosecuting the federal RICO indictment, which included conspiracies in the Brinks robbery and in the liberation of Assata, at which Saul was expected to testify, called me and reminded me that I was still Saul's attorney. And he wanted to let me know that neither the U.S. Attorney's Office nor the FBI would interfere with me in any way and would actually facilitate my visits with Saul. Incredible. Saul also telephoned my office frequently. He wanted to know whether I was still his lawyer and said he wanted to see me desperately. Would I please visit him? Incredible. I taped all of my conversations, both at home and in the office, and when I reviewed them several years later, I was amazed. The government was just as clumsy and stupid as was the board of directors of Harlem Legal Services. It was not until June 3, 1983, when the venue had been changed to Goshen, New York, that the new Judge Ritter granted my motion to withdraw. He had directed me to appear in court, and I did so reluctantly, prepared for a contempt citation. I sat in the first row among the spectators, demonstrating my separation from Saul. Under those circumstances, I suppose Ritter had no choice but to accept my decision. I later learned, during the federal RICO trial in which C.O.W.S. and Sylvia Beraldini were charged with aiding in Assata's escape, and along with Guy Cecil Ferguson, Jamal Edward Joseph, Ileana Robinson, and Bill Osuni Ali, with conspiracy in the Brinks case, that Saul did not testify for the government. He did, however, on the appeal of his conviction in the Rockland County case, cite the allegation that I had failed to adequately represent him because I was a movement lawyer and my loyalties were not to him but to the other defendants, thereby denying him his constitutional right to effective counsel under the Sixth Amendment. The Appellate Division of the Supreme Court of the State of New York dismissed his argument, stating that I had in fact represented him more than adequately. Their opinion, published in the March 16, 1988, Law Journal, said in part, though Ms. Williams's request to withdraw as counsel upon learning that the defendant provided information to federal agents may be an indication that she was interested in the success of the movement, there had been no showing that this interest created a conflict which bore a relationship to the defense. The law and the circumstances of this case, viewed together, revealed that meaningful representation was provided the defendant, that she vigorously represented the defendant's interests and conducted his defense appropriately. Chapter 21. I had spent months away from the office working on Saul's case in Rockland County, calling Glenda at lunch break every day to check cases and emergencies, arranging evening appointments, and spending weekends at the office catching up. So it was not until May 18, 1983, when I had received at least 20 wrong numbers and no calls to my usually busy phone lines, that I first became aware that intercepts had been placed on the phones. I called the telephone company that day to report the interference after I had dialed the office number from a payphone and received the message. There is trouble on the line. Call again. When I called again, I heard, I'm sorry, this phone has been disconnected. I reported what I believed to be cross-wiring and the lines appeared to clear up. By the end of December, there had been a sharp drop in new cases, but overall 1983 had been my most financially successful year, and I made allowance for the seasonal slump, assuming I would be able to weather the lull. But by February 1984, I still had no new cases, and although I was as busy as I ever had been, my time was spent on matters I had already been paid for. On Monday, February 27, 1984, Glenda told me that her grandmother had died in Suriname and she was taking the 2:00 p.m. flight from Kennedy Airport the next day. She needed money for the trip and I wrote her a check which she took to the bank to cash. She had made an appointment for me at 3:00 p.m. with a long-standing client and asked if she could leave when he came so that she could get ready. I suggested that she leave as soon as she returned from the bank, but she insisted on staying until the client arrived. I had spent the night completing a brief and telling her to call me at home when the client came. I left the office. When she hadn't telephoned by 4:00 p.m., I called her. She told me that the client hadn't kept the appointment and that she was closing up. Despite the fact that I told her to keep the keys for the few days she would be gone, she insisted on coming to my apartment to return them. I noticed that she was extremely nervous and agitated, but I attributed her anxiety to her grandmother's sudden death. She never returned. After 2 weeks, when I looked into her desk, I realized that she never intended to return because the drawers had been emptied of all of her personal possessions. I knew something was drastically wrong, but the true circumstances of her departure were not revealed to me until 2 weeks later by the client with whom I had had the appointment the day she left. And I was shaken by what he told me. Glenda had been trafficking cocaine from the office during my absences. When I was present, she would nod customers away after they knocked on the upper glass door to determine whether I was there. My office was in the back, concealed by a folding door that I always kept closed, so it was impossible to tell by looking through the door whether I was in the office. My client told me he had made cocaine purchases from Glenda and had heard her make many drug deals over the phone. On that Monday, he was to be the intermediary between her and a major drug supplier. She had asked for an exceptionally large number of kilos to be delivered to the office at exactly 3:00 p.m., and my client was to make the delivery and pick up the money from her. Glenda knew the supplier, but his suspicions were aroused by the unusually large order and her insistence that delivery be made at the office at exactly 3:00 p.m. Unknown to Glenda, the supplier refused to complete the transaction, telling my client either that I was being set up by the FBI for a major drug bust or that he was. And he ordered my client to stay away from the office that day. Not only had he not made an appointment with me, but he said that Glenda had assured him I would be in court and he was surprised to see his name in my appointment diary. As he talked, the pieces fell into place, and I realized that I had been the target of a major FBI sting operation, saved only by the street smarts of the supplier. As I analyzed it, my dwindling bank account reflected my depleted business, and clearly I needed money to continue my practice. Between the phone intercepts and Glenda steering new business away, I was in the kind of financial situation in which selling drugs to extricate myself would be an acceptable explanation to the public. I could see the headlines, the exorbitant bail that I could not have posted, the lengthy trial, the guilty verdict, and the endless appeals while I was, win or lose, eternally discredited as a lawyer. I asked my client why he was telling me now, and he said that Glenda was still in the city and might return for her job, and somehow his sense of decency compelled him to tell me in the event she did. I didn't ask why he hadn't told me about Glenda before because it wasn't necessary. She had once been useful to him, and she no longer was. After my conversation with him, my neighbors in the stores adjoining the office told me tale after tale of drug traffic in the office during my absences, especially on Friday afternoons when I was rarely there. I had made it easy for Glenda because I always called several times a day to check for messages, and she always knew where I was when I planned to return to the office after court and when I was going directly home. I learned that there was a lookout to spot me coming up the block in the event I returned unexpectedly. In the days that followed Glenda's departure, her customers continued to call, asking for her, pretending to be relatives or friends. One actually blurted out, "Did that bitch blow that gig?" I'm embarrassed to reveal the extent of my stupidity and my trust and my carelessness in the face of what I knew the government was capable of doing. But despite trusting Glenda, I had never breached the confidence of any of my clients. By July, I knew I would not be able to continue much longer. When the phone rang, it was always the wrong number, and for days, even weeks, it simply didn't ring at all. I hired new secretaries who left after a few weeks despite their enthusiasm for the job, and it was obvious to me that their sudden, unexplained departures were the result of government pressure. I spent more time in the office only because I no longer had the volume of cases that had kept me in court almost daily. A former client came in to tell me that she had just called the office for times, and a man's voice had answered saying no one was in the office and asking her to leave a message. When she called the operator, knowing I had never had a male secretary, she was told the line was being checked for trouble. She came to tell me that something was drastically wrong and to warn me to be careful. Another client had been directed by an intercept to a number in Florida where I could be reached, another to a Michigan number. I kept reporting the intercepts to the telephone company, who denied that any existed, until I played a recording I had made. Then the "this line is being checked for trouble" tape was disconnected, but others replaced it. And I was finally forced to accept the fact that I was no match for this electronically sophisticated assault and close the office. Had it not been for the comfort and support I received from my family and Doe, I think I would have been as shattered as my dreams for a neighborhood law firm had been. Doe, who had successfully operated the real estate business her father had started in Richmond, Virginia, came from a long tradition of breakthrough black legal achievements and knew the heartbreaking roller coaster journey it was. Her father, Spotswood Robinson, Jr., had been the dean of Virginia Union University Law School, then a black segregated institution, had founded the Virginia Mutual Benefit Life Insurance Company of Richmond and was vice chairman of its board of trustees and general counsel, as well as one of the vice presidents, directors, and attorneys for the Consolidated Bank and Trust Company in Richmond. And her brother, Spotswood Robinson III, had been a longtime civil rights lawyer, working closely with Thurgood Marshall and Robert Carter in preparing the Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court case before he was appointed the presiding justice of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Washington, D.C. Circuit. As I had throughout the years and times of trouble, I went to Wilmington and walked for hours on the beach, picking up shells and driftwood, examining them as closely as I did my life. Old memories flooded through me, but only briefly. They were like old friends and old photographs, to be looked at occasionally and remembered warmly, but no longer relevant to the exigencies of present-day crises. I replayed the tape of my recent experiences and forced myself to keep my finger on the forward button when it threatened to slip to rewind, but I couldn't. I was in disorder, no longer able to keep the many compartments of my life separate from each other. Now they were colliding, spilling their diverse contents, forcing me to relive the whole of my existence in one piece instead of within the selected segments I had previously chosen to live them. I questioned the choices I had made during the long distance of my life. How many had been mistakes? Had I been unintentionally reckless or intentionally courageous? It was only after I had forced myself to reassess each of my choices that I was able to reaffirm them. And it was only after I had carefully examined that self-evaluation inventory that I was able to release the explosive anger I had been withholding. My mother reminded me of her lifelong advice not to accept blame for consequences that I bore no responsibility for creating, and only then was I able to leave Wilmington and return to New York to begin again. Chapter 22. Shortly after my return to New York on August 30th, 1984, I received the phone call I had been anticipating for 5 years. Assata called me from Cuba to tell me she had been granted political asylum, her usually quiet voice pitched to unprecedented height above the telephone static. But before I let myself believe it really was Assata, I kept my voice cold and distant, asking her to tell me something only she and I knew, not permitting the flood of relief and happiness to envelop me until I was sure. I had received many telephone calls throughout the years from people who claimed to have messages from Assata, who asked me to meet them on unlit corners in unoccupied sections of the city, but I had believed none of them. I even had some telephone calls from unidentified voices that sounded like Assata's, and Doris had received calls from Assata-sounding voices telling her to meet her and bring money. There had been rumors she was in Cuba, but there were also newspaper articles pinpointing her alleged presence in the United States. On February 14, 1980, the New York Post headlined a story about Florida bank robberies with Shesemerd hunted in Florida bank heists. Reporting. The FBI says escaped cop killer Joanne Shesemerd may be responsible for a recent crime spree here in 2 South Florida bank robberies. Although it added, no one has identified her yet positively. And it also reported that she had robbed banks in Georgia. In 1980, one Assata was called the mastermind behind the Brinks armed robbery and was identified by several eyewitnesses as a participant but was never indicted. The entire front page of the November 22, 1982 New York Post was covered with the words, "Hunted girl cop killer gets new look," and a blown-up photograph of Assata, allegedly uncovered in a safe house in Pennsylvania, adorned the second page, along with the caption, "Lovely but deadly." The suggestion was that the photo represented a passport picture, but no postulation was made that she had left the country. On the same day, a federal RICO indictment charged Sylvia Beraldini, Mutulu Shakur, Susan Rosenberg, against whom charges were later dropped, C.O.W.S, and 3 others with planning Assata's escape. In 1984, when a New Jersey state trooper was killed by a black man, the Daily News headlined its article "Probe Killer's Links to Joanne," while the body of the article quoted both Clinton Pagano, the New Jersey State Police Superintendent, and FBI spokesman disclaiming her involvement. On May 10, 1984, the Daily News warned, "Shesemerd may be hiding in New York." And on June 6, 1984, a task force of the FBI and state police in the northeastern states was formed to apprehend Assata and 10 other fugitives, among them Susan Rosenberg and Timothy Blunk, who were arrested on December 1, 1984, in New Jersey for possession of explosives. Newspapers roared. Terror suspects nabbed in Jersey. Pair linked to Joanne Shesemerd. The Daily News featured a story. They're down to a fearsome foursome. Accompanied by pictures of Assata and 3 others, Marilyn Buck, wanted in connection with the Brinks case, called the Quartermaster and the only white member of the BLA, providing getaway cars, safe houses, false documents, and weapons. And later convicted of aiding in Assata's escape. Thomas Manning, who with Raymond Luke Levasseur was being sought in connection with the December 21, 1981 shooting of Philip LaMonaco, a New Jersey state trooper, both believed to be members of the Sam Melville Jonathan Jackson unit, which had taken responsibility for bombing several buildings in Boston. And Mutulu Shakur, called the strategist for both Assata's escape and the Rockland County Brinks robbery. So when Assata called me, I had to be sure it was she and that she was in Cuba. She convinced me by repeating a sing-song ditty she always teased me with as a child. Auntie, Penny, Jacko Standy. And barely coherent, I gave her Doris's new enlisted phone number and immediately began making plans for Doris, C.O.W.S, and me to visit her in Cuba. The most difficult part of my planning was having C.O.W.S certified as having been born. I had attempted to obtain a copy of C.O.W.S birth certificate shortly after she left Elmhurst Hospital, where she was born, and had been told by the Department of Health's Bureau of Vital Statistics that none was on record. although filing a birth certificate is an automatic procedure required by all hospitals. But since we had the hospital's official custodial release and a birth certificate had not been needed when we enrolled Kakuya in nursery school and Hunter College's campus school, I had attended to more urgent demands on my time. But now we needed it to have a passport issued, and I shifted into high gear, spending days at the Manhattan, Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn departments of vital statistics, although it should have been on file at central headquarters in Manhattan. No one could explain why it had not been filed. I even went to New Jersey and obtained an affidavit from Dr. Garrett attesting to the fact that he had delivered the baby at Elmhurst Hospital. I was finally told that the only way a delayed birth certificate could be filed was if her mother signed an affidavit requesting one. When I said that her mother was out of the country and not available, I was told that the only other way was for Kakuya's court-appointed guardian to apply. When I went to surrogate's court to file a petition for Doris to be appointed Kakuya's legal guardian, I was told I needed her birth certificate. And the passport office told me that they needed both her birth certificate and letters of guardianship before they would issue a passport. Several months had passed by this time, and my temper had reached fever pitch. I stormed into Manhattan's Department of Health and demanded to see the supervisor, who told me the only other way a birth certificate could be issued was if the director of Elmhurst Hospital requested one, so I took the subway to Queens to speak to the director. I think I must have explained the situation to about 5 uninterested people at Elmhurst Hospital, all of whom told me that they couldn't help and that the director didn't do that sort of thing. One indifferently motioned me over to the office of the director of hospital records, who was out to lunch. I waited for the director to return and was shocked when a tall, attractive, red-tinted, and straightened-haired, fashionably dressed black woman waved her long, fingernail-polished hands in aloof disbelief and said, "Of course, the child was born here. And of course, I'll prepare the application." I have told this story a million times because it demonstrates the falseness of many black militants' belief that the courage to fight our battles is clothed only in Afro hairdos and African dresses. Although I would not ever again straighten my hair because I consider it unworthy of my heritage and admit that I too perceive these bourgeois black people with a certain unconscious disdain, this woman was an example of the way in which outside appearances can conceal true identity. As I left, she smiled for the first time and said matter-of-factly, "Of course, we won't be surprised if the Department of Health refuses to accept this." I arrived back in Manhattan just before closing time, prepared for the worst, already planning the legal action I knew I would have to take. But the supervisor, while shocked and disbelieving, had some hurried consultations with her superiors and issued Kakuya's birth certificate then and there. I filed the petition for Doris's letters of administration in surrogate's court and waited 2 months before they were granted, and then only after I had been to the clerk's office several times asking why they were delayed and had written a letter to the surrogate, Bertram R. Gelfin. Perhaps the easiest phase of the process was receiving the passport, which arrived a few days after we sent in the application, and within weeks all of us were on the plane to Cuba and Assata. But during this period before Kakuya's papers were in order, I decided to visit Assata first and squeeze out a 5-day weekend for the trip. Number 1, I couldn't wait to see her, but number 2, a decision had to be made whether Kakuya would remain with her, and I had to be satisfied that the person I had known so well hadn't been negatively altered before Doris, and I would be willing to relinquish Kakuya. The flight to Miami was short compared with the endless wait in the Miami airport until check-in time for the chartered plane to Havana. I waited alongside the crowd of Miami Cubans lugging enormous suitcases and duffel bags of food and other household articles and listened to the excited language I barely understood, even though I had hardly begun playing my beginner Spanish records. At every checkpoint through which I was permitted to pass before boarding the plane to Havana, I wondered if I would be stopped. Would the U.S. government let me through? My determination to reach Assata quelled all my anxiety as I vigilantly watched for disguised FBI agents. Over and over, I thought, what changes had 5 years made? Was she the same person, or at least, was she an acceptable modification? I was filled with both joy and apprehension, unable to separate one from the other. When the plane landed at Joe's Marti Airport in Havana to the noisy applause of the passengers, I stepped out of the plane and paused halfway down the steps leading from it. I watched the passengers scurry into the buses waiting to take them to the terminal, took a deep breath, and lowered my eyes to continue down the stairs when I saw Assata smiling and yelling. And tea. Waiting at the foot of the steps with a Cuban official to drive me to the hotel room the government had reserved for me. She was Joey and Assata all at the same time, and as we hugged and talked and hugged and talked, it was as if no intervening years had separated us. We slept very little over the next 3 days, and I visited her apartment and toured the school C.O.W.S would attend if the decision was made for her to stay with her mother. I was pleased with this country that had provided a haven for Assata, who was still energetic and still committed, and who was enrolled in the political economics master's program at the university and was writing her autobiography. She was full of anticipation at the prospect of seeing the child she had so seldom even held in her arms, and at the same time fearful of the long-awaited meeting. In April 1985, C.O.W.S, Doris, and I made the first of many trips to Cuba, and while we were there, we all decided that C.O.W.S would remain with Assata. C.O.W.S was 2 weeks old when we had brought her home from Elmhurst Hospital. One room of Doris's 3-bedroom apartment had been easily converted into a nursery, and Doris had taken a year's leave of absence to care for the baby. And it was fortunate she did, because when C.O.W.S was about 6 weeks old, Doris noticed an almost imperceptible inward turn of her left foot. Dissatisfied with the diagnosis of several podiatrists, which ranged from a perfect foot to an untreatable condition, she found Dr. Lloyd Sears, a nationally acclaimed black podiatrist with an office in Queens, who found the embryonic deformity and put her leg in a cast from the knee down for several months. When it was removed, he prescribed massages 3 times a day and an orthopedic corrective bar that held both ankles stiffly distanced from each other and that she wore at night. At the end of a year, the foot was completely corrected, although she still has to wear light acrylic inserts in her shoes. Because Kamal had a sickle cell trait, a condition common to many black people, Doris had C.O.W.S blood analyzed soon after she left the hospital. At the time, the tests were negative, but when she was retested at an older age, it was discovered that she too has the trait. The doctor explained that for the first 6 months of life, C.O.W.S retained her mother's antibodies, which accounted for the original negative results. While the disease is dormant and will not affect her lifespan or health in any way, should she have a child by a person with the same trait, their children will have a 1 in 4 chance of full-blown sickle cell disease. Except for these 2 conditions, C.O.W.S was a bright, eager, fast-moving, inquisitive, and perceptive child who both walked and talked at an early age. She has her mother's large eyes and her father's forehead, and she was a beautiful child, blessed with superior intelligence, which we were quick to notice. Doris read the poems of Claude McKay, James Weldon Johnson, and Langston Hughes to her every night after she was tucked in bed, and if on some occasions she was a little late, C.O.W.S loudly reminded her that she was waiting. As she grew older, they read together, C.O.W.S imitating the black dialogue, which she loved, with ease. She was also a fearless child and climbed the highest monkey bars at the playground long before other children her age. But her physical and emotional environment was circumscribed by the danger posed to her by Assata's public image and the possible retaliation that loomed from many sources. It was difficult to explain to her why her nursery school friends never invited her to their houses, or why none of them visited hers, although she had the companionship of Bawai's son, Donnie, who was the same age and lived in the same building. Doris and C.O.W.S vacationed to all of the Caribbean islands during the summers, as well as Epcot Center in Florida and the Sea Islands in South Carolina. When C.O.W.S was 4, Doris had her tested and applied to the Hunter College Campus School for Gifted Children, where she was accepted. Before she was admitted, I advised Dr. Alan Seidman, the principal, that she was Assata's daughter because I wanted to avoid the negative impact any sudden revelation might have had in relation to her admission to the school or her continuance there once accepted. He said, "Thank you for telling me, but it makes no difference. Kakuya is our kind of student. We want her here. She belongs." We were fortunate that all of her first grade teachers were black and understood that Kakuya was special because she was Assata's child. Any question about the special nature of her presence in the school was quickly dispelled when, shortly after she was admitted, television monitors were placed throughout the school, the number of uniformed guards was doubled, and they carried walkie-talkies. But her teachers provided their own special brand of security around her, quietly and unnoticed. Kakuya lived with me during her first year at Hunter, and her teachers would not let her out of their presence at the end of the day until I came to get her. They would stay late if necessary and would relinquish her to no one except my sister or me. Kakuya also had a code word to be used in case of emergencies if a stranger offered to bring her home on the pretext that one of us was ill. The word was Amala, Kakuya's middle name, which means hope for the future. And the person would have had to know the name as well as its meaning. In her later years, when she remained with Doris, she took the express bus from the Bronx, and I met her at the first bus stop, and we walked to school together. Even when she was 10, Doris paid a very responsible Hunter High School student who lived nearby to accompany her home on the express bus. Kakuya was so bright, hardworking, and charming in the same rather quiet way typical of her mother that everyone took a personal interest in her. The math teacher scolded her for preparing projects for other students, giving her an A and explaining that the others would get the marks their own efforts had earned. The science teacher awarded her a certificate of achievement. The social studies teacher marveled at her research paper about the Trail of Tears journey of the Cherokee Indians, and the English teacher knew that the play she had written, dictated to me over a long, arduous weekend and typed by me, was in fact written by no one else but Kakuya. And she was so talkatively inquisitive that I nicknamed her Running Mouth and had a sweatshirt made for her with the words printed on the back. As she grew older, we enrolled her in the Alvin Ailey Dance School, and she performed in their annual benefits at City Center. We bought her a piano and hired a piano teacher, and Kakuya played so well that she was one of the recitalists who appeared in a special concert for beginning students in Brooklyn. All of her many talents were encouraged, both to expose her to an environment of people with broad perspectives and to wrap Kakuya in the traditions and culture of her people. African books filled the bookshelves, and African paintings decorated the walls. County Cullen's and Langston Hughes's poems of struggle were extended to the wider African struggle, and Doris took her to community meetings and cultural events of significance to Black people. We supplemented her small family birthday parties by renting the Roxy roller skating rink off the West Side Drive, to which all of her school friends were invited and came. When Kakuya went to Cuba to live with Assata, we were both bereft, and Doris grieved for months, barely able to remain in the apartment filled with Kakuya's mementos. But we were both comforted by her reunion with Assata and the fact that Kakuya was not living in the drug-infested, death-driven racist country that might claim her life. In Cuba, she was protected and safe from physical harm. Afterward, in 1984, after Assata's phone call, Doris and I visited our parents with Kakuya to tell them the good news. We noticed that our mother's usually sharp perceptions and memory were becoming dulled, and our father, who initially denied the possibility, was finally forced to acknowledge the debilitating disease, later diagnosed as Alzheimer's, which took her life on her birthday, November 9, 1986. But while she was still alert, she knew that her Piggy, Assata was safe in Cuba. After her death, my father spent his days on the beach, driving the four-wheel drive Subaru over the sand that his 86-year-old legs could no longer travel. But God failed to fulfill the contract my father said had been made with him to live until he was at least 100 years old. And on July 21st, 1991, at the age of 90, he died after a few days' illness. During 1987, 1988, and 1989, I taught a seminar in family law at the Urban Legal Studies program at GGNY, and since then, I have been associated with the firm of Stevens, Hines, and White, Lennox's office. International in both its composition and its legal interests, the firm has lawyers from Africa, the Caribbean, Europe, and the States, and 3 secretaries, Felicia, Joyce, and Rosetta, who provide exceptional expertise. While the daily practice of law is no longer part of my life, I still accept especially challenging cases, but I spend equal time reading African history, relearning African art, and painting the seashells and driftwood I collect from Freeman's Beach with Black Liberation's colors black, red, and green, and with Horace's eye. And I have come to the conclusion that Assata reached a long time ago. Direct action by the people is the only hope for change. I avoid meetings where rhetoric mimics the great Black orators of long ago. Nothing is new or newly said. Ideas only sound new because they are applied to the old realities experienced by a new generation, while the conditions of Black people remain fixed in the stagnation created by white racism in the United States. Unfortunately, centuries of Black efforts have led to a perverse analysis by some of today's African American youth of the reasons for our collective failure to attain equality. This analysis has turned blame inward and directed misplaced accusations at our heroic past leaders, with no recognition that historical distance should not be permitted to obscure historical reality. Unless our young people remember that legal barriers to full participation first had to be removed, that legal slavery and then legal segregation had to be abolished, and that the right to vote had to become the law of the land before the unrelenting extra-legal restrictions on our lives could be attacked. Their analysis of the reasons for our present condition remains defective. Our collective effort for survival must move forward as it looks backward. To blame our past leaders because they were able to achieve only partial success during their lifetimes is to dismiss generation-framed limitations and to minimize the tenacity of the racist restrictions the dominant society has imposed on our lives. It is true that past gains are not enough. Each generation must continue whatever struggle is required by the changing nuances of the racism they face. But we can no more charge any one person or generation with the responsibility for our past fate and our future direction than we can implant future vision into every eye. Whites continue to criticize us because every Black person does not emerge bloody but unbowed from that deep abyss of containment into which they have lowered us. But their criticism is hypocritical. It is a self-congratulatory appraisal of their own success that allows them to deny the helping hand they have received from white society. If history has a lesson to demonstrate, it is that repression of an entire segment of society will backfire. White society cannot continue to fasten the consequences of its own selfish, destructive design on its victims in order to escape its own responsibility. If there is ever to be change, white society must first recognize and accept the fact that the Black condition was intentionally fashioned by whites, and that if there is no change in that circumstance, whites too will suffer. I have examined the various theories advanced by Black pundits for bringing about change in this country. But barring total restructuring of this society, I remain unconvinced that any of them are workable formulas. I believe that equal opportunity to equally produce and share in the wealth of a country is the political and economic framework that provides the only fair system. The U.S. government's failure to give assistance to the health, employment, housing, and other basic needs of its citizenry has not created a just system, and I expect no real changes to occur until the masses decide that change must come and pressure for that change. I believe in what I like to call the verticalization of the horizontal. The horizontal base would contain the bedrock of self-knowledge and self-worth. Its ferment would hold upright upon it every black person, the laborers and the professionals, the teachers and the students, the preachers and their congregations, the elderly and the children, the business people and the customers. Together, we would move upward into a realization pinnacle, one solid apex, where black aspirations would be attained and blacks would be empowered to pierce myths and shatter obstacles. How should we proceed? What if all African American children learned that their history did not start in America after slavery? What if they learned that long before their ancestors were enslaved by Europeans, Europeans had enslaved other Europeans by the hundreds of thousands? What if they learned that Europeans were imported as slaves to the Americas before Africans were? What if they learned that we did not leave our greatness on the shores of Africa? What if they knew that our homeland had provided the genesis for all human culture? What if recent black college graduates upgraded their knowledge of African history and entered the teaching profession, especially in cities where the majority of school children are black? What if they changed the curriculum to include history as it happened? What if the books the African American scholars have written about the primogeniture status of Africa in world culture were required reading for every student? What if, after 20 years of teaching in public schools, at say the age of 42 or 45, the teachers broke away from their boards of education and with the money they had saved in collective accounts for just such a purpose, began schools across the country to teach black children their history? What if wave after wave of young college graduates earned their living in this fashion? What if?
Breaking news, criminal charges and a second arrest in the deadly shooting of a Milwaukee public school student.
Yeah, that shooting happened Friday near Cortland and Hopkins, moments after 18-year-old Namar Hicks left Assata High School for the day.
Context of white supremacy. One and done. Assata Shakur, well, it's not Assata Shakur, Evelyn Williams Inadmissible Evidence, talking about her niece Assata Shakur, all done, no second audio. New book for next Thursday. I'll make my decision, let folks know by Tuesday, just in case I give myself a few days in case I change my mind. But new book next week on the Katherine Massey Book Club. That segment at the end there, she was talking in the afterword about black teachers building schools for black children and the impact of all of that. That segment at the end there, that was from this week, WISN News in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where they talked about the young black male shot Milwaukee public school student shot at Assata High School in Milwaukee. Yes, named after Assata Shakur. And I saw that. That was from this week, just a couple days ago, day ago, really. And I saw that. I was in Milwaukee this summer, stayed there for a month. While I was there, I talked about it. They said they had the highest number of student shootings, student deaths, I believe it was more specifically, for the 2025 academic calendar year. And had all these reports of violence at the schools, and what are we going to do about it? And this is unacceptable, and yum, 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 all this. Again, Milwaukee, the largest so-called racial group is Negroes in Milwaukee, so I would suspect, who are the victims of all these Milwaukee public school shootings? But anyway, that's Assata. I couldn't even believe that they allowed a high school to be named Assata. But it's not in New Jersey, it's in Wisconsin. But there you go, Assata High School. I don't know if they are teaching about our African history and all the rest of it, but they are busting caps, duck down, at Assata High School in Milwaukee. If you have closing thoughts on the text, what did you learn? The prison break, all the rest of it, let us know. Number 720-716-7300. The code 564-943#. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. I know last week we had one, I was being foolish, messed up the switchboard, didn't see we had folks who dialed their hand up, and I missed the hand till we got to the very end. I'll try and do better this week. Star 61 if you have commentary. But one of the hands that I almost missed last week, he said, oh man, Gus T, do you think this book is good? Put that in quotes. And generally I do not read literature. In fact, I think that's kind of juvenile and why we have some of our problems in terms of non-white people. I know tons and tons of non-white people. We're not serious about replacing white supremacy with justice. That shows in all areas of people activity, and specifically it shows in literature. Either we don't really read things very seriously. There'll be books that we say we want to read, and then we'll take 20 years before we get to actually reading that book. And we read lots and lots and lots of fiction. Things that this is really not serious anyway. We're talking about romance and love stories and a whole lot of nonsense. Now, I do not look for good books. That's really not whatever. A good book is constructive. I learned a lot about the system of white supremacy. Not it held my attention. The characters were funny. The romance scene, like, I don't care about any of that. Did you learn something that is going to help us solve this problem? I have seen generations and years of black people who pile up all kinds of fiction books. We've had Pam, we've got that. We got tons of that. My mom, we got tons of that. That has not helped us solve this problem. Reading good fiction. Hate you give. Get it together. So for me, a good book, what did you learn? Is it constructive? Do you know more about what it means to be classified as white now than you did before? This one I would say constructive. Hey, I learned a little bit more about COINTELPRO. Learned more about that prison break. Learned a little bit more about some of these attorneys, because she named a lot of black people, black lawyers specifically, who influenced her and then she influenced and all of that. So quite a bit. Even this week, man, COINTELPRO. If anything, that one word, until all of the black people, your grandmother, your grandfather, your granddaughter, your grandson, your brothers, sisters, cousins, nieces, aunties, until everybody is a PhD Rhodes Scholar, like race soldier Cecil Rhodes, until we're all PhD Rhodes Scholars on COINTELPRO, we are not qualified to be wasting time reading no fiction. Get your library stocked up on COINTELPRO books, not the hate you give, read all of the romance. Come on, get it together. The email, untiljustice@gmail.com. untiljustice@gmail.com. Anywho, let's see. Folks who wrote in will get your commentary, and then the folks who dialed in will get your commentary as well. What did you learn from this text? For people who were with us way back when, and or if you read Assata's memoir, what did you learn from this text not in Assata's memoir? Fill in some of the gaps and all that good stuff. I do know this book has so much more detail about the actual prison break and all of that that's not really included in Assata's material. So I do greatly appreciate that about this book. And then she includes a lot of the newspaper articles and such that go into more detail about all of these bank robberies. Like even this week, where they just keep on. This is after she's escaped. They say, oh my God, she masterminded the Brinks robbery. And oh my goodness, we've had a bank robbed down here in Florida. And she did that one too. And oh my God, all of that stuff. Like, wow, master deceiver. Like white people, I told you, Black OJ, if white people want to, they will say you committed every crime in the world. They'll come in and do, Assata, she took a shot at President Trump. She responsible for the climate change. Matter of fact, I think she had a hand in the government shutdown, didn't she? They will blame you for everything. And then, master deceivers, they will have people believe it. You did it. She messed up the shutdown. She took a shot at president or whatever. As a matter of fact, she might have helped Luigi shoot that white man. Insurance. Master deceivers, and particularly when you get to blaming things on black people, oh man. Any hoodles, let's see. We'll get in our email, see if folks have commentary as we wrap it all up with inadmissible evidence. Let's see. Get email number 1 in. Hopefully I will not act a fool with the switchboard this time around either. Let's see. Email number 1. Greetings, Gus, listeners, callers. Reading this text and the recent transition of Assata Shakur has made me think a lot about counter-violence. It reinforces my skepticism that counter-violence could ever be used as an effective strategy to solve our problem, but I could be wrong. Yeah. I haven't really seen any evidence that would make me think otherwise. White people kill for fun. And I've not seen any changes from the 1970s to where we are right now on the cusp of 2026 that armed black people cause any more difficulties for white people now than they did in the 70s. If anything, white people seem to still get very excited. Armed Negro, Christopher Dorner, load up, we gonna go get him, boys. Yeah. Or what was that in Texas? Micah Xavier Johnson, where he was accused of shooting 5 police officers. They called him a Negro cop killer too, and they put the drones on him. Put the little robot and sent it in there with some sort of IED and blew him to smithereens. Remember that, 2016? So yeah, I haven't really seen any evidence of white people having any difficulties with armed Negroes. A lot of times they'll do a Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, where they shoot you before you even get a round off. Shoot us, black people, with guns, Robert F. Williams style. Shoot us before we even get a round off. That's normally the way they do it. Matter of fact, I just played that report in Illinois. They were talking about, this is like right now, days ago. They said black people in Illinois throughout the state, legal, law-abiding firearm owners, they've been locking them up and charging them left and right. Negro with a gun, up, clink, we don't allow that in Illinois. Let's go. Got they mug shots up and everything. Chapter 20. Submitted my resignation and opened my own office from 1981 to 1984. Glenda Robinson from Suriname was my receptionist. 3% of businesses in the U.S. are so-called black-owned, whatever that means. I think this is 0.1. It might be 1%. Either or is very low. So I'm going to go to this as a period. So it's 1% of U.S. gross revenues. 71% are between 1 and 9 employees. I think that's what we heard today with Miss Evelyn Williams, because she said she had Gloria and she would get her it seemed like she would go to the temp agencies, so as she needed them, she would get like a paralegal or secretary or whoever, someone to come and help her get the briefs and things together. But she said her dream was, I can hire maybe 2-3 other black attorneys. We can have a nice little office here, but she wasn't able to get that up and rolling. That's what we hear from most of the black businesses. It's 1 employee, maybe 2, 3, but it's not Jeff Bezos, Walmart, Starbucks type of a thing. We just got hundreds and hundreds, thousands. We don't even have a dozen employees. Let's see. 2. Represented Solomon Brown in the Brinks case, 1981. Judith Clark, Samuel Solomon Brown, Catherine Boudin, David Gilbert, May 19th. The Weather Underground, we had some of them on the cows way back. The Black Liberation Army indicted Sekou Odinga, Kwasi Balagoon, Matulu Shakur, Marilyn Buck, anti-imperialist. I think Marilyn Buck is white. Solomon, the only black arrested at the scene. Solomon Brown, sentenced to serving 75 years, eligible for parole in 2056. Jesus Christ. Hopefully we'll have justice by then. Judith Clark, suspected racist, was incarcerated 36 years, released at age 69. In 2018, Catherine Bodine, suspected racist, released 2003. David Gilbert, suspected racist, sentenced to 75 years, eligible for parole in 2056. Sekou Odinga, released in 2009. Kwasi Balagoon died of AIDS in prison in 1986. Dang. Marilyn Buck, suspected racist, died of uterine cancer 1 month after being released from prison in 2010 after 2 decades. I think she was the white female driving one of the getaway vehicles for Assata. It was reported that she was a major part of the planning. Anti-imperialists reminds me of the term Antifa used today. Yeah, definitely lots of overtones, and nigger lover, that might be in the same ballpark. The racist suspect would be most appropriate for all of these white people, including Sylvia Baldini, but whatever. 3. Solomon was beaten. Nyack County Jail, Nyack Hospital. Was beaten. Rockland County Jail, broken neck, spinal surgery. Westchester Medical Center. Solomon was visited by FBI agents. Kenneth Maxwell, Robert Cordier produced Solomon Brown. Beat him. Threatened to kill him. Beat him. Slapping him across his head. Believed safety would be in jeopardy. Miss Williams, I always talked to him as if he were wired. December 15, 1982. Saul called me, said he was going to testify against the other Brinks defendants. I don't think Mr. Brown had much choice in the matter if he wanted to live. And I think she did, kind of detail all of that out for. I mean, you get your neck broken, you could have been killed, which they're talking about. But that's not I got a little boo-boo. I got a paper cut. I got a bruise. Like, you could be killed easily. Once we start talking about we're going to break your neck, like what? Do what? And that's any non-white person. Like, oh man, she can do all that talking about, we got these other black people, they were dedicated to the cause, and Sekou Odinga, he's real down for the cause, and I'm militant. You can burn me with cigarettes, and smack me around, and smack my head, break my neck and everything, and I'm not going to talk. I'm not, my mouth is closed. I'm not going to say, well, whatever. Y'all can talk all that. Every person has a breaking point, and white people know this. Everybody gets cold. Everybody gets tired. Everybody gets tired of being beaten on and tortured and punished. Everybody has a breaking point. It's very easy to go in and you gonna talk. That's why they do all that. Well, Willie, we got Leroy in the other room. Now you can talk or you can serve the whole years. I mean, you've already seen that, all of us. You know that. You can talk all that. We got solidarity and we down. That's my black brother. Man, please. You can serve the 50 years or, you can go ahead and testify. Make it easy on yourself. It's up to you. White people got lots of it. That's how Fred Hampton, William O'Neill, and we got all these folks snitching and all the rest of it. Like, come on. Let's see. 4, Federal RICO, Chewy, Cecil Ferguson, Jamal Edward Joseph, Ileana Robinson, Bilal Sunni Ali, the Brinks case. Ferguson and Joseph were sentenced to 12.5 years. Robinson and Sunni Ali were acquitted and went free. Lots of these bank robbery trials, as we've already heard about, lots of acquittals. And I've even heard other people who talked about that, like, man, they sat here and blamed Assata and all these rowdy black people and said, oh man, you niggers robbed all these banks, and oh man, all your mischief and you radical revolutionaries. And blah, blah. Lots of these trials ended in acquittals. Now, you can make of that what people, I've had people be quick to tell me, hey, just because OJ got acquitted, that don't mean he was exonerated. Well, okay, true. But dang, you all said all these rowdy niggers did all this robbing and looting, And you got this whole racist system. Lots of times there's no niggers on the jury. It's no nigger judges in a lot of these cases. It's no nigger lawyers. We got Evelyn Williams, but she's saying it's a lot of white attorneys, prosecuting and defense attorneys. Lots of them are white. Everything is in your favor. You got all the propaganda. All the newspapers got all these grisly-looking pictures, scary black people, and you call them every name except a child of God. How didn't you get more guilty verdicts in all this? How was it such that they didn't even convict Assata on anything? If I was listening correctly, I only heard the one conviction for the Turnpike case, and they had to go back to court repeatedly for that one. Like with all the lies and racism and cheating, y'all should have been slam dunking these cases. Like convict, 40 years, boom, 50 years, boom, 20 years, boom. That's not what happened. It was a whole lot acquitted, mistrial, hung jury, acquit. That's what it was like. Man, come on. Chapter 21. May 18, 1983. Intercepts on my phone. The surveillance techniques available to the race soldiers is so much more sophisticated today. Facts. This is like 50 years ago. Facts. They probably have it refined to the point where you wouldn't even know. You wouldn't hear no clicks on your phone or, getting these odd messages and all the rest of it. We got digital copies and transcripts of your whole conversation, and you are never even aware. That's what domination, and probably who even knows with all the extra technology and surveillance and God knows what that they got now. Jesus, who knows? Anyway, let's see. 2. Glenda, grandmother, died from Suriname. She was extremely nervous. She never returned. Glenda had been trafficking cocaine, target of an FBI sting operation. Glenda had been steering my business away. Black sister hell. Facts. And that's what I said going back where she said, with Saul. And I mean, even that, like, we can take a black dude, charge him, lock him up, put him in. This your black brother. This your defense team. We put him over there. And then we snatch him back. Tell us everything they said in the defense meeting. Get their whole defense strategy. And we've heard that many times because I keep reminding y'all, Johnny Cochran, he said the same thing. Geronimo Pratt, who was mentioned in this book, same time period, like, dang, they came and infiltrated and spied and everything else to get our whole defense strategy. That's, that's not legal. That's not constitutional. You're supposed to have constitutionally guaranteed defense in it. Nah, we're not doing none of that. And then they do the same thing, different strategy, but do the same thing here. We just plant our mold. And then, like I said, white people, they got so many different ways. Now, look here, Saul, we give you a break. We give you a better cell. We give you better food. Or, your neck is kind of painful. Be shame if you got DDT'd on this concrete in here, wouldn't it? Yeah, just something to think about. You make a choice, Brother Saul. See, they have lots of ways of doing it. Probably still doing that sort of thing for the niggers that they are concerned about. Yes, we're going to infiltrate your defense team or whatever it is. We're going to know everything your attorney writes down, every phone conversation. Oh, we got all that. I'm embarrassed to reveal the extent, and even back to the Glenda situation, like, man, the drug dealer, because that's how it seemed like that she found out about all this. The drug dealer is the one that, what they say, pulls your coat to look like your secretary been selling stuff out the office when you not around. Got a sophisticated operation too. They had to look out to see when she's not around. Man, come on. And then that same thing, white people can just come and, oh man, Evelyn Williams, the crack mother of Harlem, same way that they are. And in fact, they'll probably even tie that in and say Assata, that she was using this to fund her whole illicit criminal operation. See, Assata been trafficking the cocaine from Cuba. They got some sort of sophisticated trafficking operation where she smuggled the goods. They get it up from Cuba and get it up to New Jersey, and they, take over the whole drug operation for the tri-state area. That's the way that they'll put it. Like, what? I ain't even, what? Come on. And even Evelyn Williams' name was in the paper in her own right, like Assata was too, for sure. But Evelyn Williams was in the paper. They were writing articles about her like, oh man, she's putting in this work to help her niece get out of prison and representing the Black Liberation Army and blah, blah. And what we heard last week with the Harlem tenants trying to get these black people, make sure they get quality housing so they're not being evicted and living with the rats and roaches and no heat and freezing in the wintertime in New York and all that. Counter-racist work we've been saying the whole time. Very admirable. Why weren't some of the other black people who were aware of this, right? Because it seemed like other people knew that this was happening. Like, oh man, when she's not around, they, messing over black sisters, selling drugs. Why didn't somebody else come and let her know? Like, oh man, you need to fire that chick, man. She gonna mess it up. Matter of fact, she gonna try and blame this on Assata too. Nope. She doesn't find out until it's almost too late. And even then, they were saying, hey, we're trying to make sure that we don't get caught. We're just kind of letting you know after the fact. But this was set up for we don't want to get caught and mess up our drug operation. We'll have to do it another way. Might be why Dr. Welsing said sobriety would be best. Anyway, and that was a pattern too. Lots of these black people that were interested in replacing white supremacy with justice then and now in terms of time period, white people did the same thing. We don't want these niggers talking about justice. Get them on drugs. Let's get them on drugs. Jean Patache wrote a whole book about that, drugs as weapons against us. He wrote a whole book about that. And it pops up in other sources with the Black Panther Party. Let's see if we can get Huey P. Newton on some drugs. Let's get some drugs. And yeah, get some drugs. They won't be thinking correctly, and they'll have other focus. They got the Black Panthers in California. Somewhere. We could take over the drug trade in Oakland. What? I thought we were about producing justice. What? They were anti-drug. They were telling their members, like, we're against drugs. Get off of that. Be about justice, not narcotics. Let's see. Number 4, Spotswood Robinson Jr., Dean of the Virginia Union University Law School, Virginia Mutual Life Insurance Company of Richmond, Consolidated Bank and Trust Company in Richmond. Brother Spotswood Robinson III was on the Brown v. Board of Education decision, 1954, the Justice of the U.S. Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. Born in 1916, died in 1998, the first African-American appointed to the U.S. District Court for D.C. 1966, became the first African-American U.S. Court of Appeals, D.C., appointed by President L.B.J., the first African-American Chief Judge of the court in 1981. Their grandfather was born into slavery. Very impressive. Spotswood Robinson and the third, very impressive. Number 5. I questioned my choices. Mother reminded me not to accept blame for the consequences. I bore no responsibility. Returned to New York to begin again. I think Dr. Welsing used to make statements to victims during her lectures which sound similar to this. I think that is true as well. We're victims and we're not really in charge of too much. Chapter 22, anything really. RICO charges. Sylvia Baldini, who we heard today, Matula Shakur, Susan Rosenberg, charges dropped. Sekou Odinga planning Assata's escape. Susan Rosenberg, suspected racist, incarcerated 1984 to 2001. Sentence commuted by President Bill Clinton in 2001 on his last day in office. Originally sentenced to 58 years. Why would he pardon her or commute her sentence? Like, Member of the MC19CO, name based on a combination of the birthdays of Ho Chi Minh and Malcolm X. What? What? I'm just... What? Now, I told you, Sylvia Baldini, she said that her parents, they were against the Vietnam War this time period, but what? We're going to say we're radical, not racist white people, and we'll name our group after Ho Chi Minh and Malcolm X. What? The organization combined reportedly the Weather Underground, Bill Ayers was a guest on the program, and the Black Liberation Army. One of the first inmates in the federal HSU, High Security Unit, Isolation Unit in the Lexington, Kentucky, allegations that this was an experimental unit for sensory deprivation for political prisoners. That might be true. I just saw a documentary film that was talking about solitary confinement and use of prisons during this time period, and they were doing a lot of prison experiments. Jonestown this week is 47 years to the date. Prison experiments, but that was all the same time period, 1970s, whole so-called civil rights movement. Really, the whole system of white supremacy is one big penitentiary, but that was going on all throughout this time period, so they probably were doing experiments on all of these folks, really. 1984 New Jersey state trooper killed. Killers linked to Joanne Chesimard. She may be hiding in New York. Marilyn Buck, only white member of the BLA convicted of aiding escape. Thomas Manning, Raymond Lavassieur. 1981 shooting of Philip LaMonaco, New Jersey state trooper. Members of the Sam Melville Jonathan Jackson unit. That's kind of the same thing. Jonathan Jackson, Black Panthers out in Soledad prison. Bombings in Boston. Assata Shakur, the mastermind of the Assata escape, allegedly. Rockland County Brinks robbery. Thomas Manning, suspected racist, born in 1946, died in 2019. He died in prison after receiving a life sentence. He reported that he became politically radicalized after a previous stint in prison after a conviction for armed robbery. He served in the armed forces in Vietnam. Raymond Lavassieur, suspected racist, French Canadian. Oh wow, that's one of those Quebecois. Sentenced to 45 years, paroled in 2004 after serving half of his sentence. He reported that he became politically radicalized after serving in the armed forces during the Vietnam War. Lots of so-called white people said the same thing, that they went halfway around the world and bombing and killing all these slopes and gooks and slant-eyes, and lied about why we're doing all this and what are we doing this for? This isn't even our war. You got us all the way over here and we're doing all this nonsense, and for what? Lots of white people said that. You just lied about this whole thing and didn't even support us to come over and win the war, and I'm what they call disenfranchised. I'm done with it all. Y'all done lied to me and I'm done with it. That don't say that they no longer practice racism. They just mad about the Vietnam thing. Let's three. Tall, attractive, and red-tinted, straightened-hair black woman, long fingernail, polished hand. Of course, the child was born here. Falseness of many black militants' beliefs. Afro hairdo, and African dress. I too perceive these bourgeois black people with a certain unconscious disdain. We are so conditioned for anti-blackness. Facts. They didn't say these are Latinos that don't like black people. It sounds to a degree almost like, ew, you don't count black people with their old straightened out, chemically mutilated hair, bougie niggas. Wait a minute. Do they have 8 black grandparents? Because that's supposed to be my black brother. I don't bougie niggers. You think they're cute. I don't. Black brother. The black brother. Yeah. I applaud Miss Williams' insight into this. Facts. But the anti-black, now, Assata did talk a lot about that in her memoir as well, and it should be, but just facts. It'll be lots of reason, no reason at all for the disdain. Really, even the anti-blackness. Go back to the drugs, man. If it was really all that about black people, I'm not saying, hey, white people can come and beat you down. They can break your neck. They can make you snitch on other black people. They can make you do all that. Do you really have to come and sell drugs? White people can make you do that too. You can't be, no, I'm not doing no drugs. You're not going to get, I'm not doing no drugs. I'm not doing no drugs, man. You can't even get me a sandwich. You can get all the heroin I want, but I can't get a sandwich. I can't get a place to stay without roaches. Come on, man. No, I'm not doing no drugs. You have to get another black person to do some setup and get all this drugs and then try and blame it on somebody trying to do the correct thing. Why didn't, that black culture? We don't do no drug stuff, especially setting up no other black person that's trying to do the correct thing. No, I'm not doing no drug stuff there. Nah. Let's see. And ain't no change in that today. We talked about that before as well. Let's see, in terms of the drug usage is more rampant now than back then, I'd say, because we got all the recreational usage and stuff. Let's see. 4. Jose Marti, Havana Airport, April 1985. Marti is a Cuban national hero because of his role in Cuba's liberation from Spain, 1853 to 1895. He died on the battlefield against Spanish troops. How about that? 5. Kikuyu had an inward left foot. Dr. Lloyd Sears, nationally acclaimed black podiatrist, he's not even supposed to exist, in Queens, Kamau had sickle cell trait. Kikuyu, she too has the trait. She was tested. She's gifted. Hunter College Campus School. Dr. Alan Seidman was principal, an example of why racist white supremacists are so dedicated to preventing black people from becoming physicians. Dr. Welsing. Indeed. And teachers, so many things. Lawyers, so many. Just having some of these black people in some of these areas could be so beneficial, but no. Incidentally, when I did hear about the sickle cell trait, this has come up in the book club before, and it is often said, I submit an act of racism. Many people will speak as though, white and non-white people will speak as though only black people get sickle cell. This is a black disease. It is not. There are many people throughout the world, white and non-white, who get sickle cell. There are genetic reasons for this. Dorothy Roberts talks about this specifically in emphasizing, reminding people, no, white people also get sickle cell. There are whole pockets in the world where you have big populations of specific types of white people who do get sickle cell, and is a big problem for them too. Afterward. Oh, I skipped one. 6. Code word. Amala. My attempted spouse developed a similar family code word many years ago. If one is in danger, something to consider doing for both children and adults. Real talk, with the technology that they have now, where you can clone other people's voices and such. If you just have like 30 seconds of them talking, anywhere, they have AI that can do a pretty reasonable job of cloning so that it sounds like them. You, for real, might need to have some sort of code, or is this really you? Is this, especially if it's something on the phone, because they had talked about some of the phone scams and things were happening like that, where they call and exactly almost what they said, like, hey, this is Assata. They got me on the run and everything. Hey, you think you can put a little money in my ATM? And they'll give you the code or whatever, and then it turned out that that's not them. That's real rampant. So, yes, everybody might need to have one of those, code word, just so I can verify this is you. This isn't no bot scheme type of thing. Strange times. Afterward. Direct action by people is the only hope for change. VGQ, Victims Guaranteed Qualified. I would like more details on what she means by direct action. Great point. Great point. Yes, more details. Very important with solving problems. 2. I avoid meetings where the rhetoric mimics the great black orators of long ago, aka no speech of mine. Stay in the question lane. I love that one, and particularly because, it's not about coming out to give a great speech and, I'm going to come out and get on my Malcolm X or my Patrice Lumumba or whatever. That's not really problem solving. And make sure we get a definition for racism. That would be grand, so we can have specifics, and then direct action. What do we mean? Just so we can get enough details and specifics about what we are supposed to do, what we are not supposed to do, a timeline of events, schedule, that type of thing. That's really more what we need, not no, let's get rowdy and I love black people and say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. And exactly, rhetoric, speeches, slogans. We do not need any of that. Black talk. We do not need any of that, whatever that is. We don't need any of that. We don't need any of that. We just need accurate information to help us solve problems. 3, perverse analysis. African American youth analysis has turned blame inward and directed misplaced accusations at heroic past leaders. I read this similar to Neely Fuller Jr.'s recommendation to avoid conflict with other victims. None of us has solved the problem. Absolutely. It even reminded me, I saw a report the other day about, it was a black person saying that they wanted to oppose the tendency of us putting our heroes on a pedestal, and this was for black people. So like, I don't know, like Malcolm X, people mentioned here, Dr. King, and putting up these people are just godly and kings and queens, that type of thing, I guess. And when I saw this the other day, I said, man, that's not been my experience. I tend to see that we just do a lot of criticizing. One, we're not very informed. Not saying all, but many non-white people victims of racism, we are not very informed about, that's why I said, one thing I learned, all the different people that were mentioned in this book, different black attorneys at Spotswood, Robinson, and others who influenced Assata Shakur, people that she met or mentored her or she mentored them, and then they ended up doing great things also to work against racism. I don't think we're informed, myself included. I don't think lots of us are informed about these people. And then as she said, there is a strong tendency to criticize. Dr. King didn't know what he was talking about. He was a sellout. Nelson Mandela didn't know what he was talking about. He was a sellout. He wasn't doing it right. He didn't know how to deal with white people. That's very common. In addition to, like I said, being totally ignorant and uninformed about these people completely. But very common. Not squabbling, not fault finding. Learn the errors and the mistakes that they made, build on it, and let's just get to solving the problem. But yeah, I'm no fan of the, really, Fuller said all the time, resist the urge to criticize. Even the old folks who know they didn't solve the problem, but we haven't either. So let's just get to the problem solving, and everything else should come out in the wash, as they say. 5. 4, skip 1. 4. If there's ever to be change, white society must recognize and accept the fact that the black condition was intentionally fashioned by whites, and that if there is no change in that circumstance, whites too will suffer. VGQ. Racist white supremacists are not ignorant about racism, white supremacy. They are simply dedicated. Absolutely. And I think white people, they know they are responsible for the way black people behave and the condition that we're in. They know that. I think frequently white people know this much better than we do. They just lie a lot of times and try to make us think that, these old dumb white people, and they just need to take their blinders off. That's not the problem. That's not the problem at all. 5. Verticalization of the horizontal. Not sure what this means. I'm not sure what that means either. That's what I said. Details. That's not a big thing. No rhetoric. The metaphors and such, like, let's be specific. We got big problems to solve. Let's try to make sure that we're being as precise and scientific and explaining so we can get down into the details. Like, that's what she means. The verticalization of the, verticalization, you kind of have me. They're like, what? What? What's going on? 6. What if the books the African American scholars have written about the primogeniture status of African in the world culture were required reading for every student? VGQ. This kind of reminded me of the "we are descendants of kings and queens" statements of victims. Maybe I'm misunderstanding her, though. No, I think you got it correctly, because, yeah, she almost said some pretty similar things they were saying, where what if we learned that our history didn't start with slavery and all the things that we did on the continent and blah, blah, blah. And Yeah, it does. That I got the same impression, that it sounded very much like we were once kings and queens and blah blah blah, and our glory on the continent. And yeah, I've seen lots of that, and I just don't think that's going to help us replace white supremacy with justice. Whatever royalty that we had way back when, that is over. It has been over with for quite some time. Let's get what she said, the verticalization of the horizontal. If that means replace white supremacy with justice, let's get to that. And even the portion with the school, I had to say, just because of everything that's going on right now, if black people had done that in mass, like she said, if the teachers, black teachers, we're going to take our little nickels that we've been squirreling away. Now, that's going to be hard in and of itself with the salaries that teachers have gotten over the last 40 years or so, but whatever. They squirrel their nickels aside, and they say, okay, we're going to start putting schools together to teach black children the information that they need to know. Given what we've seen over the last 10 years with DEI and now Department of Education being closed, what makes you think these schools would get accreditation, funding? What makes you think these schools would get anything other than total sabotage? They don't even give correct funding to the HBCUs, so what? You don't have schools, what are these, like charter schools or something, K through 12, and y'all are going to teach about what? New African Republic, Assata Shakur, Black Panther Party? What are you going to teach? The sabotage effort would be out. You thought they were talking about you were selling crack cocaine out of your office. Oh, my Lord. All these schools, that they're just little mills of pills and Ozempic factories and drugs and all the rest of it. That's what they be saying. It's no way in the world. In addition to DEI and all the rest of it. And we don't even allow black male teachers. So if they did see something like that, I suspect they would probably tighten the noose up. And I use that metaphor deliberately. They would probably tighten the noose up for education degrees. Oh, y'all are being subversive teachers. Well, let's see how many Negro teachers we allow you to have now. That'd be about what I'd expect to happen. But, you know, admirable goal. Just don't see it happening. Black people, we've had people on the program, black people who opened up schools, and they just talked about, wow, challenge, not saying not to do it, but just, man, the resistance and obstacles from white people. Woo. Good luck. Let's see. I think I got all those in. Make sure I didn't miss any other notes. If other folks have observations, thoughts, as we are all done with Assata, *61. I'll go back and grab some of the notes that I took for this week's section before we get ready to wrap up new book for next Thursday. Let's see. For chapter 20, she mentioned the great C.O.W.S. Lumumba, attorney in Detroit with the New African Republic. The late C.O.W.S. Lumumba was mayor down in Jackson, where they had all the water problems and such. He passed away not too long ago. His son picking up the baton, so they say, and continuing his counter-racist effort. But many, many years of service from the great C.O.W.S. Lumumba, and all over the continent doing work to try to help black people and work against racism. I'm sure he has a massive COINTELPRO file, C.O.W.S. Lumumba. Let's see. And then they beat on Saul in prison. Let's see. Scared him to death. I'm sure there was lots of this during this time period. That's another reason, at least for me, when there's all this talk about agents, provocateurs, and all of that. I mean, Saul, we can go back to William O'Neill, because we talked about that. I think he was like 19 when they, quote unquote, recruited him. This is going to be your job, William O'Neill, black male. You're going to go out, we'll give you black folks we want you to check up on, come back, report to us what they up to, what they talking about, all that good stuff. But, man, It is real. The people who are most to blame are white. This is not one where it's man, Saul, you know, counting. My interpretation, I did not think that Miss Williams, that she was blaming Saul or talking bad about him or anything. She no longer wanted to represent him because he had been compromised, and she didn't think that that was just for him to come in and get their entire defense strategy and then take it back to white people. Totally logical. I agreed with her, but it seemed like she even had an understanding of the power dynamic. She was trying to help Saul out and bringing him food and everything, but they done broke his neck, beat on him and tortured him like they do these other black people. Like, man, it's hard for me to turn around and say, man, Saul should have been stronger. Where's your Negro pride at? Hang on, brother. You don't chump out just because they put a cigarette on your forehead. You don't chump out. What? I'm going to tell you, they burn a cigarette on Gus T. I'm finna blab on if I have to make up some things on retired firefighter, victim in New Jersey, Lauren, any of the rest of y'all. All of y'all will be cocaine smugglers by the time we get. Everybody has a breaking point. We're victims. Brother Saul. Let's see. And that too, that's why Fuller said we get out of that thinking that we're black brothers and sisters to begin with, because the system of white supremacy can compromise those relationships so easily. Shouldn't be thinking that we're all super tight anyway. Let's see, chapter 21. Oh, she finds out about Glenda and all that. That'd be another one where I say, who's more informed about white supremacy racism? Because she didn't find out until it was almost too late, like way too late. Let's see. I can't emphasize enough, white people and drugs, like that is one of their massives. Black people look like they're starting to get serious and really using their brain computer for constructive things. Poison them immediately. Like, get as many drugs, different types of drugs, weed, heroin, cannabis, speed. We have to make up some new ones. No problem. We'll get cracking on that too. But drugs, sobriety would be best. Sobriety would be best. Protect that brain computer. Chapter 22. Oh, and she's hearing from Assata. I can't imagine the stress of that either. Like, they have the prison escape. Obviously, you can't be, texting Assata every 5 minutes. Where you at? You okay? Blah, blah, blah. All that sort of thing. So you just, pray, hope for the best. You're seeing her in the newspaper every other day. They're talking about she's robbing banks here. And, oh, she robbed this bank in Florida. And, oh, she was the mastermind of this crime here. And other. I cannot. And then they're bugging your phone. You got people calling and impersonating their voice. Hey, Joanne, hey, or hey, Evelyn, it's Assata. Give me something. Like, that would drive you crazy. Like I said, they're tapping your phone. You got drug sales going on in your office. The financial strain of all of this. Man, the way that, again, Dr. Welsing said we do not qualify for mental health. This would be why. I cannot imagine the strain of all that. And she being Assata, she has a daughter in all this that you're helping to take care of, and the daughter's in danger. And are they going to try and kidnap her from school or something else, make it a ransom situation that you better turn yourself in because we got your daughter here and that type of thing? Like, Jesus. Stress. I thought it was great the way that they pitched in to take care of Kakuya, Evelyn, and I guess that's her grandmother, Assata's mom, Doris. They, pitched in and got all these school codes and doing the best that they can to compensate. But I mean, wow, that sounds like it would be really stressful parenting with a child that is, and then it's mandatory. You're gonna have to talk to this child about racism, like, immediately. As soon as they can understand things, like, woo-wee, Racism 101. By the time you get to kindergarten, like you done been to about 50 nearly full of junior lectures. You done read Dr. Wells and ISIS papers and everything. Like, geez. Mandatory. You don't even. How are we going to tell you about your mom if we don't talk to you about racism in detail? No metaphors. We're going to have to give it to you as honest as possible and immediately, and because you got to know what these school codes mean. We got to tell you about COINTELPRO so you know what could be happening at school. Like, this is super serious. Eesh, man, I do not envy that parenting job. Let's see. I'm very eager to see some of the newspaper articles that were mentioned. Hunted girl cop killer gets new look. Like, what? That's in the New York Post. Like, what? And to me, the outrageousness of these titles and the bank charges and such, where they got all these acquittals, like, white people lie all the time. And when you're in a position of dominance, you can just go make up enormous lies. Like, Assata really could have been in Cuba. They say, we just going to say she did this bank robbery in Poughkeepsie. And this one in Illinois, too. Just keep putting it out on all this. So everybody, oh, my Lord, she's the most dangerous person ever, and we need to get her. None of it. And they'll sit around and do that and know. We know Assata in Cuba. We watching her right now. And that's the same thing they did with Geronimo Pratt. We say Geronimo Pratt committed all these murders and crimes and everything else. Some of them, we know Charles Manson did it. But whatever. We're going to put it on the nigger so we get him in even more trouble. They love doing stuff that master deceivers. Let's see. Chesimard may be hiding out in New York. Just print big bold-faced lies. Big bold-faced lies. Maybe. You know darn well she's not in New York. Well, got a cousin that look kind of like her. Can't be sure. Let's see. They changed up the birth certificate and all that. I think that might be a little bit more difficult to do now with the records and all that. Let's see. I don't know what it would be like now, like trying to get, you got to have real ID. Like, I don't even know if this would be possible now with, I mean, just that alone, real ID. Would this be possible now? Can you fly if you don't have real ID? Would they have been able to get real ID fakery for her? That would mean like you'd have to get a fake passport, I would think. Maybe she had a fake passport then, but I know it would have been a lot easier to get on a plane then as opposed to now. Yeah, I think this would be a lot more difficult to execute now. Even it would have been a lot more difficult, or excuse me, it would have been a lot easier to execute even just before 9/11 at the beginning of the year in 2000 as opposed to after 9/11. Like, ooh-wee. I think it would be darn near, I won't say impossible, but it would be a lot more difficult to try to pull something like this now, even with a white person, I would think. Let's see. They were talking about Kakuya and how smart she was. They said that as she grew older, they read together Kakuya imitating the black dialogue, which she loved. I don't know what that is. What is black dialogue? Is that I'm black and I'm proud? Mad Dog 2020? It's Saturday night, I'm black and I'm dangerous? What is black dialogue? Y'all would have to break that down for me. Like, I don't even... Ebonics? You would have to break it down for me. What is black dialogue circa 2025? Do I need to go listen to a Kendrick Lamar album and figure it out best I can? Still learning. The word bright was used, I thought, a number of times to describe a smart child. That's one I would hope we can try to work away from. Smart, intelligent, precocious. Lots of different ways that intelligence can be articulated without it being associated with bright, since, yeah, if you are not smart, are you dark which is kind of what they say. In fact, that's exactly what they say. If you are lacking details, they say, I'm in the dark about what it means when you say verticalization. I'm in the dark about that. I say we should move away from that. Intelligence is not about bright or dark. It is about knowledge, information. Let's see. Afterward, so she gets the phone call and they're going to go meet up. I was kind of thinking, like, I don't know, is it safe? Well, I mean, that's her daughter and all that, but just, I was thinking, like, man, she's on the terrorist list. Like, I mean, they're saying you're a cop killer and a bank robber and the soul of the Negro liberation movement. You know, you worse than Antifa. So they coming in to bomb you. Like, I don't know. That just went through my mind. I mean, that's her child. So, I mean, hey, that's your child and do it to it. But that did come in my brain computer. Like, would it be better for her to just stay with the grandparents? I mean, at least until she's a little bit older. Like, I don't know. But hey, whatever. That I would be curious about. Now, I don't know how you would get the update on that. Like, maybe she has a website, assatashakur.org, but I would be curious, like her daughter, or maybe her daughter can write a memoir. That would be cool. Like, what was it like growing up? How was all this explained to her? Like, at what age did she start to figure all this out? What was it like growing up in Cuba? Like, did she have any scary moments thinking, oh my God, like, you know, the bounty hunters are going to come and get us and drag us back? Like, I would be very curious. If anybody is aware, if Kakuya, if she writes a memoir or a biography or something, that should be mandatory that we read that in the book club, like immediate, like as soon as it comes off the presses, really. Anyway, I guess I'll add, because she was in Cuba for all that time, and you heard Evelyn Williams talking about learning Espanol. That's what they speak in Cuba. I haven't been, but that's what I've been told. This would be another one. So if all the so-called Latinos that are non-white, if they really, 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 really despise black people, how did Assata stay there for all that time? They would have snitched on her, right? They had a bounty, as I understand it, there was a bounty, so there was financial incentive, I guess, for them to rat her out. Like, hey, man, you know, nigga, she cop killer too, you know, send her back up there with them Yankees. We don't want your criminal problems coming down here starting up no mischief. That's at least something that would come to mind. I'm not saying that you need to be, you know, homies and buddies with all of the non-white people in Puerto Rico, Mexico, Honduras, Argentina. I'm not saying that they're in love with black people or going to replace white supremacy with justice. But I am saying that up until this year when she passed, Assata was there for a long time. I mean, she spent almost a half century there. That's a long time to be. I'm pretty sure she probably got pretty fluent Spanish being there for all that time. She would have to. Osmosis, right? If the Latinos, non-white people who speak Spanish, if they really hate black people, that should for sure pop up in Assata's experience and Kakuya. Like, oh my, you not gonna believe the anti-blackness that we experience from these dark or Latinos down here, the what do you say, Cubanos down here. You not gonna believe all the anti-blackness that we experienced. Called us negras, that's black, I think, in Espanol. Called us negras all day long and all these other old insults and everything. Oh my, this is the worst thing ever. I used to tell, man, why we should have stayed in New Jersey. I used to tell mom that every day. Should have left me in New Jersey. You come down here with these old anti-black Espanols. Maybe that was their experience. I don't know. Maybe they didn't have other options. They couldn't have went in. Even that, they allowed her to stay for all that time. Like, really? You're not just a no-count nigger. You're a criminal nigger, and we still gonna let you stay all that time? Just saying that. Not saying the Latinos are our homies. Not at all. But I am saying that would be one to think about. Assata. Anyway, worthless Negro in Virginia. Again, today's date, November 21, 2025. Make sure I didn't miss any folks' final thought, observation to get in from the text Inadmissible Evidence before we wrap everything up. Moving on, brand new book next week. I know last week I was being wacky and not, or I did pay attention to the switchboard. I just, for whatever reason, I didn't see that there was a hand there. But paying attention, looking on, don't think I missed anybody. So folks are spectating, what have you. That is on you all for this time around. New book for next Friday, and then we'll be here for the compensatory call-in on Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. But one and done, we will wrap it up and get ready for new book and compensatory call-in. Hopefully, folks having a constructive Friday evening and holiday season. Stay warm, stay constructive. Oh man, how did I forget? She mentioned so much and talked so much about reading. That was a part of Kakuya's precociousness as a young person. They said she talked so much and everything. Reading to your child. This is one I would have to say, like, my goodness. I mean, your mother is in Cuba because of the system of white supremacy racism. Really, with her, reading some of the newspaper reports that are cranked out daily about your mother and what a no-count, radical, mischievous, cop-killing nigger she is. Like, man. But reading to your child. If you don't like to read and, I don't make time to read or what have you, that might be great for everybody, because then that will make you make time to read. And then you all reading together like they were doing once the child gets older, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that sort of thing. Hey, now you all can read more grown-up books. Let them pick a book, then you pick a book. And we read together. We discuss same way we do at the Katherine Massey Book Club. Brilliant. That was one of my favorite parts from this week's abbreviated section. But reading together with your child. You all can take turns, audiobooks, whatever. But reading together with your child. And this is not something that just, we do this for a little while when they're trying to learn their ABCs and such when they're 2, 3, whatever, and then once they get to kindergarten, we don't do that. No, this is like for life. We read together. Even you get a long life, knock on whatever, but you get to live to be 70. Your child gets to live to be in their 40s. We still read together. Talk about books that have came out, newspaper articles, magazine articles, and was somebody coming to the bookstore and they gave a talk. We read together and discuss. Or audio books, we'll hang out, listen and talk together, pause it. Reading together with your offspring. Y'all can learn together. You can discuss white supremacy, racism together, and have constructive exchange of views. Love it, love it, love it. Build your vocabulary together. Like win, 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 win. One of my favorite parts of the ending of the text, maybe even the whole book, hearing them talking about reading together with Kakuya. Brilliant. Anyway, another one bites the dust. New book for next Friday and here tomorrow for the compensatory call-in. Invest if you think the C.O.W.S is constructive. Hit the blog, racism-notes.blogspot.com, racism-notes.blogspot.com. PayPal button in the top right corner. You'll see the button for PayPal, and then directly beneath it you'll see links for Cash App, Venmo, PayPal, Amazon wishlist. Enormous thanks to all the folks who have invested, kept the C.O.W.S on the air for, it'll be 17 years if we make it to February. Hopefully worthy of your time and energy. Again, the wish list at Amazon.com under Gus T. Renegade, linked on the blog. Enormous gratitude to all the folks who've nabbed an item or 12 over all of our years of broadcasting. For the broadcast today, Glenda selling the coquina out of the office. Sobriety would be best. Race soldiers have been stomping on us all over the world for a long time. we are going to need high-functioning brain computers to crank out solutions to the problem. And just like we read this week, white people have such a long, glorious track record from their perspective of skillfully using all sorts of drugs, alcohol, to further dominate and abuse us. Maybe, just maybe, we can check out what the other side looks like, meaning let's do this sober. We don't need that Mad Dog 2020. We don't need that malt liquor. We don't need that cigarette. We don't need no cocaine, reefer, maybe a little water. Wildest we get is put the lemon drop in it. That's about it. See if we can preserve our brain computer and put these race soldiers out of business permanently. Creator, remind us now. I know we read about a lot of zany white people breaking black people out of prison and bombing buildings, and woo, even still, Creator, remind us, stop saying not all white people are racist. Remind us, Kakuya, stop producing throwaway offspring to be raped by Mary Kay and or drowned by Susan Smith, white women. I love that Kakuya was not tossed in the orphanage. She had lots of black people who were concerned about her. We're not tossing her over with Devante and the lesbian white foster parents. Right on for Kakuya. I hope she write that book, man. Write that book. Kakuya, write that memoir. Creator, we ask that you remind us to maximize our time and energy, like Evelyn Williams, to replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Remind us not to waste non-white people's time and energy, especially our own. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed.
I'm a victim, brother.
Problem. You're a victim.
Yeah. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my condition. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.